Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Lucinda, Head of Crypto Communications for Block. I'm very excited to be here with Damilola Odufuwa. Dami, let's dive right in. Tell us a little bit about you and your advocacy work in Nigeria.
Hi, thanks, Lucinda. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I've been working within the intersection of tech and comms and women's rights for a few years. It's my happy place, mainly crypto. And I run, two women's rights organizations, but one that's really active at the moment, which is called the Feminist Coalition. And a lot of our work is just focused on, three pillars: financial freedom, women's education, and access to and representation in public office. But we mainly work in Nigeria. And we're a bunch of like about 12 to 13 feminists came together and decided to do what we can to change the access to financial services, politics and economic empowerment for women generally. And other than that, I've worked in crypto for a few years. Previously, I was the head of product communications and head of PR in Africa for Binance. And I do a lot of other things, but we'll be here all day if we go into that.
I love it. Okay, so in your work, what stands in the way of freedom for women in Nigeria across all the different things that you're working on?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. Where do I start from? For me, gender equality, obviously, as a feminist, is a really big thing for me. But personally, what I look at specifically is financial equality. I think money is power, and we see that all over the world. And so for me, financial freedom and economic empowerment is the biggest barrier for women. Women are, and I know it's also just being representation in public office as well as a big barrier. Women are oftentimes not in the positions of power, whether in politics, but also within wealth creation and building resources in that way, and access to financial services. So those are the two things that I really look at and I think are the biggest barriers. I think when women have access to financial services, education about those services, I see that there's a massive improvement. When these women are empowered, they're able to empower their families and essentially empower the world. And we see how, like, countries where, women are represented publicly in government or even just in private organizations, there is a massive difference into how women generally are treated. Yeah.
And in your advocacy work, what are some of the tools that you kind of draw on to reach people?
I'm definitely millennial, not Gen Z at all, but I believe in social media and it's changed the world. It has obviously its pros and cons, but I'd like to focus on the pros today. And I feel for our organization, social media was really effective in all of the work that we did in the beginning. And even before I started, the Feminist Coalition, a lot of the work I had done before in another organization I have called Wine and Wine, which is what it stands for, drink and complain because the patriarchy is awful, was using a lot of social media to, one, talk about the issues women were facing and also band together. So I'm originally from Nigeria, and women and Nigerian feminists often, many times, like crowdfund online and just have discussions that actually end up creating change online. So social media has always been a really big tool for me. And so with the Feminist Coalition and some of our first projects, which kind of went viral, which is the End SARS movement, which was about police brutality. Social media was a really big tool in not only reaching people, but to communicate the issues the Nigerians were facing, but also in like funding, like crowdsourcing funds. So social media is the biggest one, and then obviously crypto. We raised a lot of money in crypto. I think in 2 weeks we raised $300,000, and half of that was in Bitcoin. And so that, for me, as somebody who was already working in crypto, was just another use case and example of how crypto pretty much changes the world.
For sure. And so fundraising has been a major piece for you when it comes to
Yeah.
Bitcoin. How else has Bitcoin served as this tool in your advocacy work, in your experience?
In the advocacy work, definitely in the fundraising aspect. So one of the issues we had at the time, and I don't know how familiar you are with Nigeria and what's going on there. Initially, the government wasn't so pro crypto, and there was a time when people still actually can't access crypto services through traditional banks. But there was a time when they were banning accounts, and in order to continue this advocacy work to reach people to help peaceful Nigerians who are innocent, Bitcoin was the way we had to go. So it's been mainly through that too in terms of advocacy. But in my personal life as a young Nigerian woman, the use cases that I find that myself, my friends, other people use is, remittance, cross-border payments, as a store of value, hedging against inflation, because a lot of currencies like the Nigerian naira, a lot of other African currencies or currencies in Latin America are suffering from really bad devaluation. And so that's a use case that I think I actually use more in my daily life. Yeah.
And it's interesting because Nigeria, especially, seems to be almost this success story for Bitcoin adoption in many ways. Why do you think that is?
So many reasons. I think it's a combination of factors. I think where there is a problem, there's always an opportunity. And unfortunately, while it's a lovely country with brilliant people, there are a lot of problems in the financial sector, in the political and government sector. And that creates that opportunity for people looking for like an alternative. Like I mentioned earlier, the big use case that I see, and a lot of people in Nigeria use crypto for, is the fact that the naira is so awful that they need a safer and more stable asset. And what's more popular than Bitcoin? Sometimes stable coins, but pretty much Bitcoin is leading, and then you have stable coins. So I feel that given all of that, that's why Nigerians are, seen as like the success story, because they've embraced it, because they've had no other option to. When there are many alternatives, you kind of go for the unknown and then you learn about it. I mean, for me, I started hearing about Bitcoin maybe in 2018. And now that I work in the space, I mean, I know that that's even still early. For some people, they're like, oh my God, so late. But there are people in Nigeria who've known about it for many years. And actually, how I found out about crypto was through Twitter, actually. And a few of my friends working in the sector, they've been talking about it because they were having all these problems as people working in tech or working remotely, getting paid, or just like the Naira again having so many issues. And like I said, whenever there's a problem, Nigerians are people who will embrace something first, like we'll give it a try. And I think where many other countries were afraid to, there was this distrust of crypto, there was in Nigeria, but there was desperation. So people kind of really like were open to using Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
And do you think Bitcoin has kind of reigned supreme because of its popularity as kind of the number one most well known? Or do you think there are other reasons that people have turned to Bitcoin over other cryptos?
So as someone who works in comms, I'll definitely say it's branding. Like Bitcoin has good branding, it's very popular. Um, it's the most known, the most understood to an extent. Like the white paper that Satoshi wrote, I think is something that I see a lot of people quoting, and it's just the OG. I think when you're the OG of something, you kind of have that first mover advantage. And I think it's just access. There's this with Bitcoin, people see its value where maybe they don't understand the value of other cryptocurrencies that are smaller or younger. They see bigger players, institutional investors holding Bitcoin. They hear people talking about Bitcoin, so naturally they see it as the one to trust. So I think that's honestly really the main reason. Because they see it as an investment as well. I think when we think of various cryptocurrencies, there's so many, and they have loads of different advantages. Some decentralization, some NFTs, some just other reasons. But with Bitcoin, people are looking to build wealth, and they see Bitcoin. There's a comparison of Bitcoin and gold, and a lot of people hold on to that. So I think those are the main reasons. Even though Bitcoin is seen as not as stable, and we have stable coins, whatever, I think people, regardless, still feel like I would rather hold Bitcoin than hold this fiat currency that at the end of the day, like the percentage in which is depreciating is so much more than whatever anyone is telling me about Bitcoin. Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And in the States, at least, a lot of the narratives are around Bitcoin as this super volatile asset. A lot of it is tied to illegal activity. But you were the head of comms for one of the biggest exchanges for Africa. How were those narratives different in the work you were doing there? And how was Bitcoin perceived kind of in the audiences you were targeting?
Yeah, so actually in the beginning, so I started working for Binance, I think end of 2019, start of 2020, just before the pandemic. And at that time, even though I said I'd heard about Bitcoin, because I had friends in the space, I wasn't afraid. But when you speak to anybody, like when I told, my aunties and uncles I work in crypto, they're like, oh, so like a scam, like a like a Ponzi scheme. And it's so funny how 2 years later they're all like, can you teach me how to do this and do that? The beginning of before the pandemic, there was a lot of distrust and fear. But during the pandemic, because a lot of people were losing jobs and able to work, there was this like, okay, keep hearing about this Bitcoin thing. I want to learn more about it. And so at the time when I worked at Binance, we had the Binance Masterclass, which was focused on educating people about crypto, like how you can create an income and a living or career in blockchain and crypto, but specifically how to avoid scams, because that was actually the big issue. People actually thought crypto was all about scams. But over the past 2 years, and even with like my organization and what we did in Nigeria, people were beginning to see all these use cases that show, okay, actually, there's so much more you can do with crypto. Um, I think because in the US, the dollar is still like the leading global currency, there is like less of a, uh, for maybe like a desperation or a desire to really be as open to others. But like I mentioned before, because these people have not much of a choice, they are going to look at crypto and Bitcoin in that sense. So initially, the way that Bitcoin was perceived as this was the same, but it changed after a while with people wanting to build wealth and building careers in crypto. And so now a lot of it is, I want to make money. I think I can make money from crypto trading. That's what a lot of people think. Okay, I want to send money to my friends and family abroad. I think I can do that with Bitcoin. You know, yeah.
And so when your friends and family come to you for advice, where do you send them? What do you tell them to get started?
So there are loads of companies. I definitely know that I think Spiral has some resources. I know the block as well, Binance as well. There are loads of companies that have created like educational portals for people. And so I send them there because one thing I tell people about this space is that you have to do a lot of your own knowledge. And for people, when it comes to money and just how traditional banking worked before, where, in Nigeria specific or in Africa, you would go into the bank, you'd have an account officer, they would sort everything out for you. Obviously, in the West, that changed more rapidly, like in the early 2000s to 2010s, where you have digital banking, at least in the UK, where, fintech is quite leading. But a lot of people still, especially older people, they want to be handheld. They want you to like basically do everything for them. And so I'm always teaching them, like, actually, you should never give anyone your private keys, all of these things, your wallet is this. And just explaining to them the importance of being very like aware of this industry, avoiding scams, because that's a big thing for a lot of older people, that fear, but showing them these resources. And the places I mentioned, what I love about them is that they try and simplify crypto. And I think that's a big barrier for adoption generally for crypto and blockchain, people finding it too complicated. And I always use the example of like Bluetooth technology when it first came out. I don't really know the ins and outs of Bluetooth technology. I just know how to connect my phone to my car. And with, with crypto, I think we're eventually going to get to the point where, people want to understand the basics, but they want to, it shouldn't be so complicated where they have to learn 100 different things. So I always tell them, you have to do your own reading. You have to like, check these resources, they're trusted sites, try to be very security conscious. And yeah, and I send them off.
100%. Well, it sounds like you're the person to come to if you're getting into crypto.
Thanks.
So you mentioned, some different age demographics have different attitudes. So you deal a lot with millennial women, for example. When you think about older groups, how does that message change when you're speaking to, say, younger versus older? And do
Yeah.
you think that Bitcoin is just a tool for young folks, or do you think it's for everyone?
I think it's for everyone because I'm seeing people in their 50s and 60s getting involved in like crypto. And actually, like whenever I'm out and I say that I work in crypto, older people are actually interested now. Like I said, no more are they thinking I'm a scammer. They're interested in what I have to say. But the difference is, everybody obviously wants security and there's a need for trust, and safety generally. But I see that young people, they have a distrust for traditional banking and traditional financial services, and they also want to build wealth and just want their money to work for them, because it's really tough out here for younger people. Like, you want to buy a house, you want to buy a car, and like you're like, where do I start from? And you feel like your parents' generation, at least, the world wasn't as crazy as it is now, so they have different desires. I don't feel like older people are looking to like trade crypto, for example, or I don't think they're particularly worried that, okay, the bank, they still think banks are safe. What they want to know is that crypto is also safe. So if I'm moving from traditional banking, to a crypto company, a crypto platform, show me that it's safer. Show me that the returns are worthwhile. And so that's kind of the difference I see. There's focus on trust and security with the older folks and just like understanding that. And for the younger folks is like disruption, decentralization, power to the people. And yeah.
For sure. Where can people find out more about you? How do we get involved in these wine and wine groups? They sound so much
So
fun.
right now, unfortunately, Wine and Wine's on a hiatus because with the Feminist Coalition, we're doing quite a lot of work. So the Feminist Coalition is on every platform, Instagram, Twitter, feminist_co, feminist.co. And we have a lot of projects ongoing. Right now, we have a scholarship for younger girls from low-income communities, a full scholarship. And they're going to like, lovely private boarding school and learning things like robotics, which is awesome. And we have a farming project where we're trying to empower, lower income women with like the tools they need to build a small business and getting to farming, which is very popular in Nigeria, and other projects that are coming up. And, right now we're looking for people who want to donate, who want to support, who want to volunteer. So you can find out more about that on our social platforms. And then for me, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Darling Dami, also on LinkedIn. And yeah, always happy to chat about crypto.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here, Dami. It was awesome chatting with you. Of
My pleasure. Thank you for your time.
course.